Hi, this is Shambhavi. Welcome to my weekly podcast about spirituality, love, death, devotion, and waking up while living in a messy world. The Satsang with Shambhavi podcast is recorded live each week with students of our nonprofit community, Jaya Kula. For more information and to find out about attending a satsang, visit jayakula.org. Thanks for listening. Much love to you, wherever and however you are. Don't fight the tigers is a phrase that a friend of mine who's a Taoist teacher used to say, Lu Ming. Most of you have heard me mention him, and I've written a little bit about him on Kindred 108. And it means we don't always have to approach things head on. We don't always have to walk into entanglements. Just because something is a strong force doesn't mean we have to engage with it. And sometimes the best route is around, not through. Another way of saying this is that many circumstances in life arise, and there's never only one solution to them. So meeting things head on is not always appropriate in every circumstance. Every circumstance is unique, and we have to feel for the energy of a circumstance and use our wisdom to navigate it. Every way of navigating might be a little bit different. Don't fight the tigers is an antidote to our usual way of approaching things in this culture, in this time and place, barreling on through, trying to win in every situation, right? A lot of us have that attitude that as we approach life. I was just also talking to somebody else the other day who had a serious health diagnosis. You know, I had a serious health diagnosis when I was a younger person, and I don't have that health problem anymore, but I had an experience where I went to see the head of gastroenterology at Stanford, where I was in grad school. You know, they gave the grad students health insurance to go to Stanford Medical Center, and they put me in with the head of gastroenterology. I had been used to going to like acupuncturists and herbalists. I'd never been to a head of gastroenterology before. And she wanted me to do some very invasive and extreme things. And I said I didn't really want to, that wasn't how I really approached things. And she said, you have to hit this disease. You have to hit it hard. Like that. And I was like so taken aback. This was so different than the approach that I'd been used to. And I left the office, and suddenly I looked around, and it was, you know, all the fluorescent lights and the weird smells and the non-healing environment, plus the like insane personal vendetta that this doctor had against the disease that I had. And I just leaned my head up against the wall and started sobbing. You know, I just felt like this is just so wrong. And the secretary came out from behind a little glass cubie that she was locked into and said, "What's wrong, dear?" And I said, the doctor is just so aggressive and angry. And she said, "I know." That was a sweet moment that came out of that. Anyway, this is the attitude that we have. I was telling this person this because oftentimes when we go to Western doctors, we're told that we're in a fight and we have to fight everything that's wrong with us. And that's true of spiritual life too. We're often told we have to fight our problems and fight this and fight that. Fight our addictions, fight our compulsions, fight whatever. This is really not what is taught in these traditions or in any of the traditions I've studied in at all, where there's a sense of friendliness about all aspects of life. And we may have to take aggressive action, but we're never having an attitude that we're fighting an enemy. And we also know when we should walk around something or duck and avoid something altogether. So the don't fight the tigers, when you're thinking of this, the image is you're walking along a road in the forest and you see some sleeping tigers in the road. Are you just going to go up to them and wake them up and hope for the best? No, you're going to tiptoe around. You're going to give them as wide a berth as possible, right? So oftentimes in life, this is a better strategy than waking the tigers up or stepping on the tiger tail or getting all involved with a tiger. Sometimes we do have to fight, but not often. It's not as common as you think. that fighting is what's called for, or that kind of aggressive approach. Any approach and every approach is appropriate at some point or another. But mostly, as practitioners, we're trying to avoid karmic entanglement. We come into this life tangled up in lots of different streams of karmas from lots of different lifetimes. And if we become aware that we want to do practice and we'd like to be relieved of some of these burdens, then our job is to relax and untangle karma, let it unwind, and not to get involved in a whole bunch of new karma as much as we can. So often, if we're trying not to get involved in new karma, it means not getting unnecessarily entangled in fights and conflicts and things that just really aren't any of our business, that aren't going to get anywhere other than we're trying to win something. It's better to lose an argument with someone who's really not a helper on your path than to win an argument with someone like that. It's just like with diseases, Ma's teaching on it was go to the best doctors you can afford, but if the disease doesn't get cured, then just resign yourself to whatever's going to happen. Don't keep fighting until your very last breath. Feel for the times and when it's time to just relax and surrender, or tiptoe around, or as an acupuncturist I met, a very, very wise person said to me that the greatest thing she'd learned over the past 10 years of her life was duck. I took that so to heart. I was like, yes, just duck. It has served me very well ever since. Sometimes it's hard to duck because you really want to get in there and fight, get all entangled and embroiled and feel important. If someone does you wrong or someone gets angry at you, instead of fighting back as if you have been harmed or as if you need to meet their anger with your anger, you might just take forceful action, but you're not personalizing it. It's just like you can get in a fight with somebody but not be mean. You can also do something powerful to dispel a debilitating force without a sense of having been victimized. And even if someone is trying to make it about you, try not to hold up in a sense of victimization. But there's always the thought that whatever's happening is God enacting that thing. We all have various patterns, right? And I have this one pattern that's been around since I was born because my dad embodied it, which was being around certain kinds of people with narcissistic issues. And that's continued through adulthood. And I'm upset about it sometimes, and sometimes deeply upset. But when I think about it, I think, Ma, when is this going to be over? Just make this, when am I going to get rid of this karma? Right? I'm not thinking nasty things about the people that are in this condition. I'm upset about it. I don't like being treated in certain ways that I've been treated. But I'm asking Ma, when is this going to be over? Like seeing it as it's my pattern, right? It's like something that I came in with to have this pattern. So if it's a little bit real to us, we can always think this alive, aware reality is playing these parts. And this is something to do with our unique configuration that we came in with. And there's something here to be gained. There's some wisdom to be learned, even if we wish we could learn it a different way. So it's better to rail at God, to be angry at God, than to disparage or get in there in the mudslinging fest with other people. We can be angry. There's nothing wrong with being angry, but getting into mudslinging and directing our anger to hurt other people, we really should be avoiding that.
You mentioned encountering throughout your life people with narcissism. How much is it that is something you're meant to work with or learn something, or is it just like your job to deal with them?
When you say it's just your job to deal with them versus it's your job to work with the karma and find the wisdom in it. You're just describing just a normative, normal way or conventional way of working with something. You're just going to deal with it, like put up with it or try to digest it in some way in a normal way. Or you're going to work with it. You're going to bring it onto your path. That's the phrase that Buddhists use. When we have life circumstances, we bring them onto our path. We work with them with the view and the practices of our traditions. And that's what I teach. And that's what I try to do anyway. Because the normal way of doing it just doesn't really, in most cases, doesn't resolve that karma. It might make it easier for you to handle, or you might find some strategies that make it less assaultive on you, but it's not going to resolve. And I would like, as much as I'm capable of, to resolve those kinds of karmas in my life. I want to be a little lighter when I leave this particular life. So I'm always about working with things through the lens of my spiritual traditions and my sadhana.
Is there a resolution? Is there something like, is there a meaning? Is there something that I'm meant to be learning by repeatedly encountering this?
You sort of imply that the resolution of something is understanding what it means or what you're meant to learn. This way of relating to things that happen to us is in and of itself a karma. It's a kind of a group karma because it comes out of the 19th century in Europe. And it's really this idea that if we understand things, then they are resolved. This is just simply not true. First of all, any understanding we have is exceptionally limited. And simply being able to explain things or understand things doesn't actually make the energy and the momentum of the karma go away. It just makes us feel a little more comfortable with the karma. So when we talk about resolution in this kind of tradition, we mean the actual energy and momentum of that karmic pattern resolves back to its unconditioned state. It no longer exists. We no longer have any emotional residue around it, and it no longer arises in our life. We can remember that it happened. We can remember our own histories. It's not an erasure of our memories, not a memory wipe. But when we think about things, patterns that we've endured, which have resolved, we cannot revisit the emotions of them. We cannot replay them in our minds in the same way that we replay things that are still causes of suffering for us. Now, that kind of resolution is like described by teachers I've had as going back in time or unwinding time, in the sense that although you do have the memory of something, there's no charge around it. So it's almost like it didn't happen. There's no more trace of it emotionally in your life. My own experience with that kind of resolution is that it's not very frequent. More often, things just start to resolve very slowly, incrementally. They become less pressing, less present, but there's still some residue or echo that is still an aspect of that karma. However, I have had experiences where there was a total resolution of karma, and it had a very different feeling or a very different flavor than when something's just sort of fading away. Those times are really magical when that happens and really full of grace, but they're not that frequent. So unfortunately, we just have to bumble along, doing our best, doing our daily practice, and hope for the best. We are living in a time when explanation and understanding in a very ordinary way have been positioned as resolution of some sort. I'm not saying it doesn't satisfy anything in us. Because of our cultural conditioning, we do experience some kind of momentary relief from explaining and understanding in an ordinary way. But that does not make the karma go away.
I think I was thinking of it in terms of like, if I can see it more clearly, then I might be more able to resist it or like push against the karma.
Well, when you push against it or resist it, you are really feeding it in a sense, right? You're giving it more presence in your life and more power in your life. The idea is that everything is made of awareness and this creative energy. Everything here is made of that. And when we have karmas, they're like patterns of awareness and energy. They have real force, right? This is why we have this language that we're pushing against things. And the idea is that we want to dissipate the force, not get into this push hands battle with it. So the better thing to do is to redirect your energy elsewhere, to not feed these things. Now that might be very effortful. I'm not saying that we don't make an effort. I'm just saying that battling things is not necessarily what's going to diminish them. Like, for instance, if you have certain patterns of emotions or thoughts and you interrupt those patterns of emotions or thoughts with mantra, that's a redirect of the energy. It is forceful, but it's not a mental form of resistance. So think of interrupting and redirecting more than going deeper into things. And the question is also like, we do need a certain amount of understanding of ourselves to proceed. We don't want there to be large chunks of ourselves that we're unconscious of or don't have any insight into. But how much clarity do we really need about that stuff, right?
That's like thinking about patriarchy.
Right. I mean, we all have and do notice how we embody things like patriarchy. We embody lots of these larger flows, these larger karmic flows in ourselves individually. I mean, they're not what I call individual karmas. They're more group karmas that affect us individually, but we didn't come up with them in our individual lives. They just like infiltrated us, right? And that doesn't make them unreal or not something that we have to deal with, but we're kind of trying to deal with them collectively, in a sense. We all have had those times when we recognize, oh my God, I am feeling this way because of this larger flow in our culture or in all of human history. I mean, misogyny is like from the time beginnings, right? And it's good to recognize that. But then if we spend too much time like fine-tuning our explanation of it, we're really almost enthroning it. Yeah, it would be better to think or to feel into, like you can kind of feel into, what would I feel like if I didn't have that? There's a kind of experiment that I've done where something that was just a passing remark in some book I read about spiritual practice, I think it was from a Dzogchen tradition, that said, do this practice while imagining yourself sitting between yourself and your teacher. So you imagine yourself walking away from yourself and sitting in a space between yourself and your teacher. I mean, it's super powerful. And that kind of led me to, when we notice certain things that we want to divest of, walking away from them in the same way, sitting between our karmically conditioned self, between that and our teacher. And it's almost like dropping some clothing or shedding a kind of body, right? And it doesn't make it go away. This is not a magic trick, but it does give us a moment of feeling what it would be like to have the freedom of being relieved of that karma. And it's important to have a feeling for it. That works just like every other practice in this tradition, where you have to have a taste of the result before you can proceed toward the result. Every practice we do works like this. You have to know where you're going to get there. But it's a direct experiential thing. You just have this experience of walking into this sati, into this middle, which is less conditioned. And you just feel, what would it feel like to not have that? And then just keep doing your practice. Check it out.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like I said, it's not a magic trick. It won't make it go away, but it will introduce you to you without that thing. So in Dzogchen, they call transmission introduction, which is really beautiful because in the Hindu traditions, they call it Shaktipat. And of course, everyone thinks, oh, when you get Shaktipat, you're done. You're enlightened. Your teacher's going to do it all for you. But in Dzogchen, they have a more refined understanding. No, this is just being introduced. You have to do the rest. You have to get to intimately know this once you have been introduced. And that's why we have to do spiritual practice for so many years, because we have to get accustomed and acclimatized and acquainted with our more enlightened self. Satsang with Shambhavi is produced by Jaya Kula, a nonprofit community offering opportunities to learn and practice in the direct realization traditions of Trika Shaivism and Dzogchen. If you enjoyed listening, please help us keep this podcast and many other teachings open to all by making a monthly or one-time donation. Visit jayakula.org to make a donation and explore more of our offerings.